Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald. And today, well, there's no Vikings game this week, so we had to kind of resituate our game plan for this week. Generally, of course, we do a preview show, but without the Vikings playing, they're on bye. We're going to do something a little bit different. So today we'll start with some Timberwolves stuff, and basically what that means is that I'm going to facilitate a conversation about the Wolves, and Drew is going to give you some analysis. Obviously, they're looking a lot better than I think most people thought, coming off of a couple of pretty nice wins despite Andrew Wiggins being outside the lineup. We'll also talk about the Gophers coming off a loss against Iowa. Are they still fun to watch? I tend to think so, so we'll talk a little bit about that and go into some detail about the two matchups upcoming for them against Northwestern and Wisconsin. And then for our Vikings talk this week, what we'll do is we're going to talk about the games that you should be watching as a Vikings fan. We'll look at a few different matchups. Obviously, there's one very glaring one between Green Bay and San Francisco, but we'll look into a couple others that you should be watching. Not just as a Vikings fan, but as a football fan that gets a week off from your team. And then we'll finish up with our picks. So that is the game plan for today's show. Let's hop right into it, starting off with some Timberwolves discussion. So like I said during the intro here, I think that the Wolves are outplaying what most people thought they would be doing at this point in the season. They just came off of a very, very nice win against the Jazz. I think at least my buddy, who I consider to be, my reference for basketball more often than not, thought that was a pretty crazy win considering kind of the differential in opinion on these two teams. And they're looking nice just in general. They're in the playoffs right now. The first time we talked about the Wolves on this show, the question that I asked Drew was, do you think that this team is a playoff team? And both of us were, we were happy with the fast start, but neither of us were too confident that they would be a legitimate playoff team. But I'm starting to get a kind of a sense that we might be looking at kind of what the Twins situation, where they're playing pretty well. You're not really buying it yet because there hasn't been enough games played, but they're certainly heading in the right direction.
Right. And I think that's the big thing is, that I think the process is improving, and I think it's slowly starting to show in the results. I mean, I've harped a lot about, taking those mid-range shots, right? Like I hated that with Wiggins in the past. I hated that with Derrick Rose, even though it sometimes would work out for him last year. So I saw the stat. This is Charlie Johnson tweeted this. He does good work for the zone coverage covering the Wolves. He said, when Karl-Anthony Towns and Robert Covington share the floor, 41% of the Wolves' shots are coming at the rim, which is in the 93rd percentile, and 40.6% of their shots are coming from three-point land, which is in the 88th percentile. Meanwhile, 18.3% of their shots are coming from mid-range, which is in the first percentile. So they're really modernizing the offense. Ryan Saunders says, change of philosophy. It's all about threes and shots in the paint, which is, and again, looking at the numbers here, they are shooting 31% from three, which is 28th in the league.
Yep. That was my next question for you.
So they're not good at shooting threes, but it's still, it's showing that it still pays off to shoot a lot of threes, whether you're good or bad at it, because the value of a three at that percentage is better than shooting an average clip from mid-range. So it appears as if Ryan Saunders has found that out, and he's starting to implement that. And now, really, the next step for the Wolves as a team is the next year, 2 years, whatever it is, as long as you have Wiggins and Towns playing at this level, it's just to get some shooters.
Yeah. That was kind of my question that I wanted to talk to you about. So we've seen this kind of drastic shift from last year, where a team that was, like you said, shooting a lot of mid-range shots, low percentage shots, if you will, a lot of shots that I think that we saw Kobe Bryant take throughout his career that would go in for him, but not necessarily for a guy who isn't of his talent level. And you have guys like Andrew Wiggins, who obviously struggled with that, and we've seen kind of peak performance out of him throughout the 11 games that he's been in this season. He's looking like a legitimate all-star. But the question here is, if this is a team that can't shoot threes effectively, you said they're 28th in the league. That certainly qualifies as ineffective relative to the rest of the NBA. And you don't really have any spot-up shooters that can consistently drain threes. I mean, in my opinion, Karl-Anthony Towns is top 2 on this team on shooting threes right now.
He's the best.
Yeah, I mean, he's the guy that I trust the most. And I think I saw, I think it was Jim Pete or Dave Benz, one of them during the game, one of the last couple games. They straight up said that this team isn't a good 3-point shooting team, but they're still getting more effective results, and they're slowly becoming a better 3-point shooting team simply by shooting more threes. You're getting, naturally more of them are starting to go in.
Yeah, I mean, this is how James Harden scores.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how he puts up 45 points. He'll shoot 22 threes, maybe 8 of them will go in, right? And then he'll put up, 15 for 17 from the free throw line. And right there, you're looking at 40-something points, So that's kind of the model now of scoring points in bunches. That's how Steph Curry did it. It's just launching threes. And if you get hot, that obviously that works your advantage, but even taking threes and then having that threat from outside just opens up the paint a lot more as well. So, and Karl-Anthony Towns put up 7 threes against the Jazz the other night
on 15 shots, which is ridiculous for a guy his size.
Yeah, well, we've know by now that the things he can do with his ball handling, shooting, whatever it is, it's not like a normal 7-foot basketball player. Mm-hmm. And I believe now in total threes made, he's in the top 5 this year in the NBA, like overall. I think James Harden's at something like 68, and then there's a bunch of guys that are bunched at about 45 to 48 or something, and Cat's right in there. So that's I mean, in some ways, having your big guy lead your team in threes isn't great, but he's obviously a generational talent, and guys like Layman, guys like Rocco, they're figuring it out and they're improving. And then Wiggins obviously too is at 36% this year, which is to the highest clip he's had in his career, I believe. So you love to see Towns and Wiggins being the cornerstones of the franchise. And then the next step, I think now again, is just offensively anyway, is just finding shooters to complement those guys. And once they do, I think this offense, which by the way is already putting up, I think, top 5 in points per game, that would lift them to another level.
Yeah. It makes sense statistically, right? If you would, it doesn't sound right in your head, but if you shoot 35% from 3, that's still better than shooting 50% from 2.
Yeah.
Which is, it doesn't, kind of like, you have to think about it, you have to do some mental math for that to make sense, but ultimately you're going to come out with more points. So it makes sense to have this transition. It's kind of crazy to see how drastically this has shifted despite not really making any significant changes. You know what I mean? You've still got Jeff Teague running the floor. You still got Towns down low. You've actually been missing Wiggins for probably a larger percentage of this season's games than all of last year's percentage of games. Covington's back, so I guess that certainly helps. And you're giving minutes to a couple guys that that weren't on the floor much or at all last season in Layman and Culver. But this team isn't that much different. It's just simply a different philosophy. So how in your opinion, do you think the Wolves were able to make this shift so dramatically and make it's so obvious the difference between Saunders and Tibbs? It's just it's blatantly obvious.
Yeah.
Like what is the schematic difference here that we're seeing?
Well, I think now I think it's important to note that last year when Saunders took over, it was mid-season,
right?
And I think he kind of waited to for him to officially become the head coach to kind of implement completely what he wanted, his philosophy and his strategies. But also, I think Tibbs is just so far on the other side of the spectrum that it does make it pretty glaringly obvious when you get a modern coach who is thinking like Mike D'Antoni or thinking like the Houston Rockets. It shows that much more, especially too. I think, again, Jimmy Butler's not a bad player. He's a star. He's a stud, right? He's got as much talent as anybody, and he's got especially that gritty attitude that you want as well. But he does have that he takes those shots as well, right? Those mid-range shots too. You get him out of there, you get Derrick Rose out of there, and all of a sudden things open up, and you get role players that are very much okay with just sitting at the three-point line taking shots. You get Rocco healthy, who he knows his role is defense primarily and then spot up threes. Josh Okogie, defensive player primarily, but he's there to attack the lane and then hit open three if he can. So I think between the personnel changes and then the fact that Tibbs and Saunders are just so different already, I think that's where you're noticing the drastic difference.
Okay, so here's my next thought. So we obviously know who Karl-Anthony Towns is. He's been this guy for the last few seasons. We kind of see small points of his games improving throughout his career. I still think that he's on the up and up, and he could still become an even better player because there's room to grow with his defense. But basically, we know who Karl-Anthony Towns is. He's the centerpiece of this team. He's the franchise. Andrew Wiggins is starting to show that he's the guy that Cleveland took number 1 overall, and obviously the Wolves coveted and traded for. He looks like that guy. He looks like an all-star. I don't know if this is sustainable. Part of that is my lack of basketball knowledge, and part of that is just because I've seen what Andrew Wiggins can be if he's not playing his game. But he looks very good. So you've got 2 very solid pieces. My question there is, so of the rest of this group, you've got Jeff Teague, who is probably overpaid, right? You've got Covington, who, like you said, is more of a defensive stud, not really much of an offensive scorer. You've got Layman, who has been solid in streaks. You've got the rookie Culver, who has looked very, very good in streaks, and his athleticism is very clear. And then you've got Okogie, who is giving you some of the highest energy minutes off the bench of any player in the entire NBA. But who is the guy other than Towns and Wiggins that can make this team into a true playoff threat? Generally speaking, you like to see 3 guys in order to make it a complete roster. Who's the guy that steps up here, or is he not on this team yet?
Well, I mean, if you're going to pick somebody on the team, as far as, if you're taking offense, I think it's Teague. He's filled it up before. He has all kinds of playoff experience compared to these guys. Mm-hmm. But defensively, Rocco just being there has been a huge help too. Because last year he missed almost all of the season. And it's not like the Wolves are dominant defensively or anything, but just having his presence there where he's that defensive leader. He can play or defend, really 3 or 4 different positions. And then plus, I think from there, you're going to wait for Okogie and Culver to develop into. I think they both have that sort of same kind of. They're both defensive minded. They'll try to guard their number 1 player, for example. They have that attitude, and then if one of them can develop into a consistent offensive scorer, someone that can shoot from outside as well. Both of them are under 30% from 3 this year. So if one of them can develop into like a consistent average 3-point shooter, that could be a huge help as well. So obviously if playoff time comes and the Wolves are still in it, I think you're going to want for this season Teague to really step up and be that third scorer. Rocco defensively staying healthy will be huge. And then if you can get that X factor type of 6-man play from Okogie and Culver off the bench, that'd be good.
So the 2 guys that I kind of have my eye on are the 2 that you were just speaking of, and that's Okogie and Culver. Specifically Culver for me, and I think that's I don't know what it is that I like about Culver, but when I was watching him at Texas Tech last year, I mean, I'm a much bigger college basketball guy than an NBA guy. I just kind of fell in love with his game, and obviously he's a physical masterpiece. He's as athletic as they come. The skills need some fine tuning. He's certainly not entering the league as refined as even like some of a lot of guys come into the league. I suppose I don't have a great example for you off the top of my head, but there's room to grow there. Do you see him as a legitimate guy, like a legitimate star potential player, or is he going to be someone who starts consistently for 8 to 10 years in the NBA, or is this a guy that can kind of take a Kawhi Leonard type leap, where you're very solid for 3-4 years to start your career? Again, I'm not comparing him to Kawhi Leonard, but I'm speaking more of the career arc that Kawhi Leonard.
I think the arc that Kawhi ended up enjoying and is currently enjoying, I think a lot of it is just due to playing for the Spurs to begin his career.
Yeah,
that was a huge, because his attitude and his mindset, his skill set, it all fits so perfectly with the Spurs. And so I think that helped him kind of, he was on a good team, gained a lot of attention just by playing in the finals. And from there, he gained enough respect around the league and around his teammates to have a bigger role offensively. And then from there, he kind of refined his skills on that side of the ball. So, I mean, if he were to turn into a star, Culver, that's kind of the route I think he would go.
Mm-hmm. He seems kind of like that personally. He doesn't really talk all that much. He's not a big personality. That type of thing.
So, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to project that much of a star potential, but he definitely has like starter, career long starting potential where he could be a role player, kind of like Rocco, where he's just steady defensively, will contribute offensively, but he won't be your first or second featured guy.
All right, I've got two more questions for you, and then we'll roll into the Gophers. Jamal Crawford yesterday. Obviously, he played a couple games with the Wolves in the past.
Yeah.
Yesterday, he came out and basically said, someone asked him, why haven't you been signed? And he was like, I don't know. I think I still have the skills to compete. Everything I've seen of Jamal Crawford ever has been positive. Great mentor, good guy in the locker room, smart player. His defense is suspect, obviously, and that's probably what's holding him back, to be honest. But he can still spot up and shoot. So for a team that has Karl-Anthony Towns as their best three-point shooter, does Jamal Crawford not make sense for this lineup, especially if they're going to try to compete for a playoff spot?
So the problem I have with him is the same one I have with like Derrick Rose, and I guess you could say Carmelo too, where these guys love to pull up from mid-range and take those 16 to 18 contested shots. And Crawford once in 4 games will get hot, and it'll be really fun to watch, and it'll be really effective and be a net positive for the team. But overall, I'd rather have somebody that plays a little bit better defense and will kind of space the floor better versus getting the ball and immediately dribbling into the lane and creating a 15-foot tough jump shot instead over a defender. And again, that's obviously Carmelo, Derrick Rose, Jamal Crawford, 3 of the in their primes, the best scorers really in the game. But at this, it's a different era now where the scoring the basketball isn't as much about getting in the lane and putting up mid-range shots as it was for Kobe, MJ, those guys, Crawford, Carmelo. Now it's about how many threes can you shoot, how many threes can you make, and then how many fouls can you draw in the lane. Really, that's if you watch James Harden, that's all he does. He'll take maybe 1 or 2 shots from outside the paint that are still 2s in the game. The rest of them are 3s or they're in the paint. So I from that perspective, Crawford hasn't impressed me finishing the lane. His 3-point shooting has been fine, but I think he just has the tendency to get into that contested 2-point range quite a bit.
So trying to find that third piece, right? I think that the obvious name that still remains out there is D'Angelo Russell, and that's because he's playing for a Golden State team that is completely destroyed by injuries. They're probably gonna lose the most games in the NBA this year, it seems like, and they end up getting a top 3-ish pick. It seems like they're gonna have the balls to get there at least, and I'm talking about lottery balls, of course. So D'Angelo Russell, I feel like, is still. I have seen reports. I don't know how accurate they are, but it seems like the Wolves are still sniffing around D'Angelo Russell. Do you think that it's legitimate that the Wolves would go after him? Because the only reason that he didn't want to come to Minnesota in the first place was the weather, which I feel like is something that you can negotiate around. Get this guy a sauna or something like that. I feel like there's something you can do, and he would fit so well with this team.
Yeah.
And he would complete a big 3 of 3 guys that legitimately like each other, which is very helpful considering what happened with Jimmy Butler. And he could be a franchise cornerstone because is he not the same age as Towns?
Yeah, that was the same draft class.
Yeah, so he'd be a franchise cornerstone for 10-ish more years.
Yeah,
Is it real? Is it possible?
I think it's very real and very intriguing. A trade would obviously you'd have to give up Rocco, I think, because his contract is a bargain right now. Probably a pick, probably multiple picks, really. But at the same time, if you do get Russell, that's a big 3 potential, like a legitimate big 3 potential, especially with the way Wiggins is playing now. That the last decade now really has been in the NBA is about. Okay, what big 3 can you put together on your team?
Right.
And so
we've never had one of those really. We had a fake one with Jimmy Butler, but
yeah, I mean that lasted for a year and a half. They made the playoffs once. Wiggins was kind of like it was basically a big 2.5 with the way he was playing.
Right.
So this would I think give the Wolves a legitimate big 3. And I mean now the difference now with the NBA is it's like everybody's got a big 2, right? Lakers have Davis and LeBron. Clippers have Kawhi and Paul George. Rockets have Russ and James Harden. You go around the league and that it's just the big 2, Ben Simmons and Embiid with Philly. And then the Wolves now have like a kind of a lesser tier, I would say at this point. Big
Right.
Two with Wiggins.
Because you can't really trust Wiggins all the way yet.
Right. Yeah. At least I can. If he keeps playing at this level, then that's a legitimate Big Two.
Yep.
But I think adding Russell would give him a Big Three that could contend. If you get, if the pieces around the role players perform to that level, that'd be a team that could contend in the playoffs and maybe win a series.
See, that's it's interesting because the questionable report that I saw, it wasn't from anyone super. It wasn't from Adrian Wojnarowski, so it doesn't count. Okay.
Yeah.
And that I saw was that Rocco would be involved in that trade, and that I think that would be a tough pill to swallow given what he brings personally.
Basically, you'd be asking your team to win games 130 to 120.
Yeah, because you're giving up your best defensive player.
You're not stopping anybody, and they don't stop anybody anyway. But you have to put up a lot of points to win games.
That's certainly an interesting conversation and something that as I consider.
You'd be selling a lot of tickets that way too. You're putting up that many points. Yeah, that's a lot of offense.
And you don't need to worry as much about having to find a way to get that last asset to truly contend in the Western Conference. Because let's be real here. I'll ask you this once again here after 14 games now. Is this a playoff team? And then secondly, if you do believe it's a playoff team, is this a team that can win a series in the playoffs?
I can say at this point I'll say yes, because I think looking around the West, it seems like there's now this is again very early, so maybe this is a moot point, but it seems like there's a gap forming a little bit between sort of the kind of 7 to 8 seeds and then the rest of the conference. Now again, it's early, but also if they were to get in, I don't see them beating the Lakers, the Rockets, the Nuggets, Clippers, any of those teams in a series. So it'd be one of those where they might win a game or two in the series, but they're not going to advance in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's certainly where I'm at as well. I think that they need to find they need to find one more centerpiece, and I'm hopeful that Culver can become that guy. That's coming from a guy who considers himself to be a fair weather basketball fan, not just a Wolves fan, but just basketball in general. So don't take that too seriously. But I am hopeful that he could be that guy just because he does have all the gifts, right? If he can become a great shooter, all of a sudden he's looking a lot different.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about a lineup that would be like, this is again hypothetical if the Russell trade happened, but like a small ball-ish lineup where you have actually some defense on the court: Russell, Okogie, Culver, Wiggins, and Towns. Space the floor a lot, and you got some shooting out there: Russell and Towns, slashers and Wiggins and Okogie, then some defense there with those two young guys. That'd be kind of fun to watch. But again, that's I'm thinking if any trade would happen, it'd be at the trade deadline or B next off season.
All right, so from there, let's transition into football here, starting with the Gophers. Obviously, the Gophers are coming off of a heartbreaking loss down in Iowa. I think a lot of us sort of saw it coming. A lot of us were not. Maybe you didn't see it coming, but it kind of, maybe you were being a little bit too optimistic about this this Gophers season. And you're looking at a team now that is still in position to win a lot of football. 2 more big football games, potentially compete as the Big Ten champion from the West, and go to and play against Ohio State. You're still contending for the Rose Bowl. So, in my wildest dreams, again, as someone who is not a Gophers fan, but certainly roots for all Minnesota sports teams at all times, in my wildest dreams, I could not have expected that any of this would ever happen. So that loss against Iowa, do you see that as a devastating loss? Because I don't really see it that way, because I never expected this team to be a legitimate contender for the college football playoff, anyways.
No, because here was the best case scenario. Really, was they beat Iowa, they beat Northwestern, they beat Wisconsin, and then they get to play Ohio State and they get beat by 25. And then they end up, I don't even know what bowl game they would play. Would they play in the Rose Bowl?
Yeah. It'd be the Rose Bowl.
Which is still possible at this point, isn't it?
Well, if they play Ohio State in the Big Ten championship, obviously Ohio State's probably going to roll them. I don't see any possibility of the Gophers beating Ohio State. That's just my opinion. I just don't see it that way. So if they lose Ohio and they win, Ohio State is expected to win out. They're going to win against the Gophers, the Big Ten championship. They will be in the college football playoff, which would open up a slot for the Gophers to make the Rose Bowl. So basically, in order to get to the Rose Bowl at this point, they need to
win out.
Win
out until the Gophers game or
Yeah.
the Big Ten championship.
Sure. I think that they theoretically could lose to Northwestern and still be a Rose Bowl team. It would not. That would be a devastating loss to lose to a Northwestern team that, by all accounts, is very inferior compared to the team that the Gophers are fielding right now. But the one game that they need to win, no matter what, absolutely, is against Wisconsin if they want to have any hope of making that Big Ten championship and then making the Rose Bowl. So, looking ahead here, you've got Northwestern, who, like I just said, is not. I fully expect the Gophers to go in there and get a decisive W. So I'm doing the wrong thing if I was a coach, but fortunately I'm just a fan, so I can look ahead, and I'm already thinking about the Wisconsin game. This is a team that's going to come at you with a subpar quarterback and Jonathan Taylor. So if the Gophers are able to slow down that running game, I don't see any reason why the Gophers can't pull out a big victory against Wisconsin too, especially because this Gophers team over the last few weeks against quality opponents has sort of transitioned away from being a run-first team to allowing the quarterback to just air it out. You've got two different wide receivers that are in the early round conversation for the NFL draft. Which, if I told you 2 years ago that the Gophers would have wide receivers going in the top 50 in the NFL draft, I would have laughed. I mean, you should have laughed in my face. That's crazy to me. So you've got these two great wide receivers. You got a third guy, in Ahmed Bell, that's also very solid and can give you, after the catch potential and also go up and get it as well. I truly think that the Gophers are going to enter this Wisconsin game as not only a favorite, but it would be not just from an emotional standpoint as someone who's from Minnesota, but also from a football standpoint. It would be devastating to lose to Wisconsin given all that they have accomplished this year. That to me is a much more devastating loss than the one against Iowa.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The rivalry aspect, the axe.
There is quietly a rivalry with Iowa, though. That's why I say
there is. I know, but I think it's pretty clear that the one with Wisconsin, it's on a broader scale, means a little bit more. Minnesota just got the axe back a little bit unexpectedly, many would say it, last year. So, and they're going to be playing that one at home, I believe, at TCF Bank. Mm-hmm. So that's one. Yeah, I mean, I don't even at this point. The like you said, the Northwestern game result, while they should just steamroll them, mm-hmm. It doesn't really have a lot of consequences.
It's not going to impact whether or not they get to the Big Ten championship because
there's not a lot of consequences to it because you got to beat Wisconsin anyway.
Mm-hmm. So theoretically, the way that this pans out, so if the Gophers end up losing to Northwestern, which again I do not expect that to happen, but if they do, season's certainly not over because they would enter into the Wisconsin game with a back one game from Wisconsin in the division. So they could still beat Wisconsin and then win by tiebreaker to enter into the Big Ten championship. So that's when I say that the Northwestern game doesn't necessarily matter. I mean, it does for those of you out there that want to see this team finish as a top 10 in the AP or the college football playoff poll or whichever poll, coaches poll, whichever one you like the most. That game certainly matters still. But as far as getting to the Big Ten championship and realizing just kind of the dream, which to me this really was the dream of just getting to the Rose Bowl, going to Pasadena.
Yeah.
I mean, that does not have the Gophers don't get to the Rose Bowl. That's reserved for Wisconsin, Ohio State, Michigan, sometimes Penn State. This is not a team that generally is going to go to the Rose Bowl. Like this would be an unbelievable scenario.
Now, and hypothetically, if Penn State, because
that's the one team that could beat them out for.
Did beat the Gophers beat Penn State, so you'd think that they might get that edge in that scenario.
But they did come out rated one spot lower than Penn State in the playoff poll.
I think from that perspective, that Northwestern loss would be a big deal,
right?
If it comes down to like Penn State, because they're gonna, let's say they play Ohio State tough in this game. Maybe they get the nod, but Again, I don't know a whole lot about how the bowl selection stuff works and whatnot, but I think one of the questions
I don't think anyone knows how the bowl selection.
Right. I think one of the things we did want to answer was just like if this team is still worth watching, and I think it definitely is, just because, like you've mentioned, the Gophers haven't been this good since I've been alive. I don't think so. It's interesting for me. It's different. It's fun, and
it makes me almost wish that I had chosen to go to Minnesota. Like almost. I'm very, very close to like.
Well, and so what I've been saying to my buddies a lot, and it's absolutely true. If the PJ Fleck, I don't want to say shtick, because I think it's really who he is, and props to him for just just being himself, even though it's a little bit different, a little unique. Mm-hmm. But if they were like 6-5 or something this year again, like it would be getting old, and it'd be wearing down Gophers fans, I think. So the fact that it is working out, it's way, way easier to embrace him for me as someone who's like a fair weather fan, than if he, because again, he's the same person whether they are a 500 team or whether they're 9-1, but it's way easier to embrace that emotion than at 9-1 than is at 6-5. So then it looks like he's got this program in the right direction. Obviously, it's going to help a ton with recruiting. So
yeah, and that's music to my ears. I mean, if this team is this good now, I mean, again, to make this clear, I never thought this. Even when the Gophers were 9-0, I never thought that they could legitimately contend for a college football playoff. But if this does truly increase, if the Gophers start getting 5-star recruits, which that's never happened in my lifetime. I mean, once in a while you get a guy that's like from St. Paul that it's been his dream his entire life because his father went to the U or something like that. That becomes that decides to come to Minnesota over everywhere else in the country. That just doesn't happen. So this season could kind of reflect a significant change, even if it doesn't end the way we want it to. Keep in mind, by the way, Penn State does have to go to Ohio State this weekend. And if they lose to Ohio State, and the Gophers get the win that we're expecting them to against the 0-7 in conference Northwestern team, the Gophers should jump up another spot in the college football playoff poll, and they should be in pole position to be the representative from the Big Ten in the Rose Bowl. So I think there's still a lot to look forward to. This is a very fun team. If you were thinking about jumping off the bandwagon after the Iowa game, you probably were barely even on it in the first place.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm still excited, and it would be. I remember I went to the Big Ten championship when Nebraska played against Ohio State, and Ohio State absolutely steamrolled Nebraska, and it just absolutely devastated my buddy who was a Nebraska fan. But just being there in that situation was a lot of fun, and I remember thinking to myself, I wish that Marquette had a football team to have this type of experience. And so now I kind of get to have sort of a half fan experience just because, I'm from Minnesota. I get to inherently cheer for the Gophers even if it isn't my college. So I think this is still a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to that Wisconsin game. That should be a blast. So all right, so let's talk about some NFL football now. Like I said at the top of the show here, what we're going to do for the bye week, and next week's show will be a little bit different. We'll probably be talking about kind of more bye week centric stuff. This week it's going to be more NFL focused from a Vikings fan perspective, right? So I want to talk about these matchups this weekend that matter for Vikings fans, which ones you should be tuning into specifically, which ones you should care about other than just, from a Vikings perspective, which games will influence the playoff position for the Vikings. And then also some games that just might be worth watching just in general. As an NFL fan, which games might be the most entertaining. I think that's probably the best approach here that we take heading into Week 12 here. So I think we have to start with the obvious one, and that's the one on Sunday Night Football. Right. Green Bay is heading to Levi Stadium in San Francisco this week, which is probably the biggest matchup of the week for any NFC fan.
Right. Yeah, I think it definitely is. Now, San Francisco has looked not great the past few weeks because So I think the Thursday night game against Arizona a few weeks ago, they narrowly escaped 3-point win. Mm-hmm. Then they played Seattle on Monday night, and that both teams looked bad in that game for what it's worth. I think it was sloppy. Both teams were turning the ball over, and then I think Seattle came away with that win. And then they get to play Arizona again, and they escape with another win. And Kyler Murray kind of has his way in that game. And the Cardinals got off to a hot start, and it took kind of a crazy comeback against the worst defense in the NFL, or one of them, for the Niners to get that win. So the Niners are like all season long, everybody's like, is this team for real? Is this team for real? Is this team for real? Mm-hmm. To me, they would solidify themselves as for real if they beat the Packers. And then vice versa. I kind of already think the Packers are for real, and I don't think a road loss to San Francisco would really change that. But whether or not they're for real, it doesn't matter, because we are mostly just concerned with Green Bay's record. If that would fall to 3 losses this week, then the Vikings would control their own destiny for that North Division and potentially a first-round bye.
Yeah, this is a critical matchup for the Vikings, and part of that is because the Packers don't really have much left on their schedule after this week.
This is true.
So
you got the Giants, the Redskins, the Bears,
the Vikings and the Lions.
Yeah, that's not great.
So really the only other potential loss that I see on this schedule for Green Bay is going to Detroit in Week 17. That's the only one that has any potential, because the Detroit
and they might not have anything to play for. Stafford might not even play the rest of the season. It's going to be Jeff Driscoll probably. So that's probably going to be a win. So really, I'd be stunned if the Packers end up with a record worse than 12-4.
Right, and that means that the Vikings need San Francisco to bring their A game this week, because, like you said, and that's a very important point, if Green Bay does lose at Levi Stadium this weekend, the Vikings will be in position to control their own destiny. Now, that still will require a win against Seattle. That will require a win at home against Green Bay in Week 16. That will require the Vikings to conquer their demons and beat the Bears. A lot of things still need to happen for the Vikings to be able to get that NFC North crown. But it's a really good start for them to have the 49ers come out with the victory this weekend. So when you look at this matchup specifically, it's hard not. Let me put it this way. I still think Green Bay should be favored in this game. Part of that is what you were talking about with the fact that San Francisco has kind of come back down to earth the last couple of weeks. That defense was not good against Kyler Murray. And granted, he's pretty special, and he's looking more special every single week. Yeah. I think Arizona really got a good one. They got a new age, contemporary quarterback with Kyler Murray. But he made that defense look pedestrian after they had looked, 85 Bears-like for the first, 10 weeks of the season. That was basically what we saw from San Francisco. And all of a sudden, Kyler Murray's moving all over him. And Aaron Rodgers is by no means Kyler Murray, but he can manipulate the pocket. And I think we've come to realize that San Francisco's biggest asset, while their corners are very solid and Richard Sherman leads that charge, and their safeties do a lot of very nice things, Jaquiski Tartt is quietly one of the most underrated defensive backs in the NFL right now. That defensive line is still what San Francisco needs to win football games. They need to be elite, because that front 4+2, basically, that they use that in a rotational basis, everything from Nick Bosa to the inside with DeForest Buckner. They have so many different things going on for them. But I think that Aaron Rodgers is like the kryptonite for a defensive line that plays like that, because of the way he does manipulate the pocket, and he can extend plays, and he can get out of arm tackles, and he's just annoying to watch, because he's always finding a way to get that ball downfield.
Exactly, and that's why I don't want to say I'm pretty confident, but I am with you in that. I think it's a joke that the Packers are the underdogs the way they are. Mm-hmm. I think they're get 3-point underdogs even. They're given a score difference, field goal difference. So the Packers have shown no signs of weakness the past few weeks. They're getting. I mean, Devontae Adams is back now. I don't see them losing this game, to be honest. Obviously, I'll be rooting for San Francisco for the sake of the Vikings. But I think this will be a really good test for both teams to see where they're at, because I think there, to some degree, people have doubted who the Packers have beaten, and then I think on the other side with San Francisco, a lot of people are doubting if they're for real. So both teams can kind of solidify themselves as what their record says it is. They can really prove that they are worth it.
Absolutely. It's a great opportunity. It is a great opportunity for both Green Bay and San Francisco. If Green Bay wins this game, you can pretty much count the Vikings out for winning the NFC North. Something drastic.
They will be a wild card team. It's almost 100% at that point. The Vikings will be a wild card team if Green Bay wins this game.
So this is a huge matchup, and the way that I see San Francisco winning here, and I do, for what it's worth, I do think this is plausible by all means. San Francisco has proven they're a capable team, but the one way that I see them winning this game is if they make Green Bay one-dimensional, which it is possible. San Francisco can certainly slow down Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones thinks he's the best running back in the NFL, and he's been a great asset to my fantasy team. But he also he's had multiple games this year where he's had very little effect, where he's because he hasn't gotten enough snaps, and Jamal Williams has been on the field for more time, and part of that is because he's a better blocker and he's more all-purpose. But Jones is the home run threat, and San Francisco does a really good job, keeping that home run out of away from their defense. It simply doesn't happen that much. And the same can really be said about Devontae Adams too. I don't see him going over the top of Richard Sherman, and that's partially because Sherman's just such a smart player, and I don't think that his skills have fallen off so much that Devontae Adams – I just don't think that Devontae Adams can burn Richard Sherman. I think that he can complete a lot of quick catches and maybe get some yards after the catch, but I don't see Adams going over the top of Richard Sherman the same way that Stephon Diggs went over Chris Harris this past week. I just don't see that happening. So San Francisco's defense can hold this offense, but they need to get to Aaron Rodgers, and they need to make Aaron Jones a non-factor. Both of those things are possible, but that is what needs to happen here.
See, I think I look at this game differently than you, because I'm not as worried about the Niners' defense against Green Bay. It's like Green Bay's offense has not been that special to me.
Yeah,
I mean,
Rodgers,
still
have Aaron Rodgers, but
know how I feel about Rodgers, but I don't think of him as in that upper echelon of quarterbacks anymore. He's in the MVP race because his team is 8-2, but he's taken a step back. Like he's not that 2011, 2012 Aaron Rodgers anymore. And on the flip side, my concern in terms of, when I want the Niners to win this game, obviously because of the playoff implications, I don't think I trust Jimmy G. That's kind of my thing. And I think the Packers defense, I still am on I'm of the opinion that they're still underrated. Jimmy G hasn't quite given me enough to, buy into him yet.
I'm with you on that, for sure.
And now the receiving core is kind of unique in that there's a lot of guys that maybe aren't household names, but they
all
super
contribute
athletic
in weird ways.
Yeah, they're super athletic. So, and obviously George Kittle is a tough guy to handle too.
If he
that's
plays.
a big name. Yeah, but he also might not be healthy. So
right.
I need to see Jimmy G win a game like kind of on his own. Like, I mean, if you wanted to compare it to Kirk or the whole season, if you hadn't bought into Kirk yet, this week probably is that game, because he sort of won that game by himself. Like, he put the team on his back, won the game. I don't know if Jimmy G did that. I mean, he put up big numbers against the Cardinals.
Yeah.
But the Cardinals, and B, there were some mistakes made down the stretch there too. And he had they had a couple screen passes that were short passes where the yards after catch from the receivers were big too. So I just don't see it from Jimmy G. And that Seattle game was awful. Yep. So that's my biggest doubt, is that side of the ball versus what you're talking about with the Niners defense against the Packers offense.
That's certainly a problem that we have doubts on both sides of the ball, because I can't deny any of the claims that you're making either. But certainly it'll be a thrilling game. That's the Sunday night game. So everyone in the country will be watching, but I think that Vikings fans will probably be watching with a more careful eye. There are some other great games on too. So if you are someone who has the has the ability to watch every single game. I don't care how you're doing that, whether you're doing it by legal or illegal means. There are a couple of other great matchups here, and really there's a good slate for Vikings fans beginning at 12 all the way to that Sunday night game. So for the noon games, there's two for me that have significant playoff implications for the Vikings, and I think two games that you should be keeping an eye on as a fan. That's Carolina at New Orleans, which could get out of hand quick, but keep in mind it is an NFC South matchup, so you never really know with those division games. They are a bit of a toss-up, and New Orleans is only 1 week removed from losing to the Falcons, who, for what it's worth, do look a little bit better the last couple of weeks here. But I digress. The other one here is Seattle goes to Philadelphia, which is, as we were talking about before the show, that's a toss-up in the sports book right now. So that one could really go either way too. Seattle, that game, of course, will have wild card implications depending on what happens in this Green Bay San Francisco game. The Seahawks are obviously still trying to catch the 49ers. So honestly, Seahawks fans are probably pretty interested in that game as well. And Philadelphia,
Seattle, in theory, now I'm trying to think. Maybe I don't know this off the top of my head, but who would be the number one seed? Let's say if Niners lose to Green Bay, and then Seattle wins against Philly, does Seattle become the number one seed?
I think Green
because
Bay
they would have the tiebreaker over San Fran, I believe, at that point.
It would be they have the tiebreaker over the 49ers. I'm looking at the playoffs picture right now. So Seattle would move to 9-2. San Francisco would also drop to 9-2. Green Bay would be 9-2, and that's why the New Orleans Saints game also matters because they could also move to 9-2.
They could also be. Yeah, that's a good point.
So you'd have a 400 monster there at 9-2 at the top if those two games worked out the way that we're talking about now. I believe that the Packers would be on top.
Okay.
Because they have the strongest strength of victory at 518, which is honestly pretty ridiculous.
Also looking at, because they both the Seattle and Green Bay would have a conference record of 6-1 at that point. So then it'd go to strength of victory, I believe. Mm-hmm. So I guess I don't know. I'm not looking at the numbers there, but yeah, that'd be. And I don't think any of us want the NFC to go through Lambeau.
Yep, and I would rather they doesn't go through Seattle either. To be honest with you. That's certainly not an easy place to play either. If I had to pick somewhere to play, it might be New Orleans, or because of familiarity. But San Francisco is definitely up there. But then Dallas, just because the Vikings have already gone in there and proved that. And that's why this Philadelphia game is important, the Seattle versus Philadelphia game, because if Philadelphia wins here, Dallas has also got a tougher game. They're playing at the 3 o'clock game. That's my recommendation for Vikings fans to check out at 3 o'clock. They've got New England. So if Philadelphia wins against Seattle, which is possible. I personally, we'll get to our picks in a couple minutes here, but I personally see Seattle winning that game. And I'm going to take Dallas against New England, but I think a lot of people would say that New England's going to win that game. So this week, it's funny because the Vikings aren't playing, but this week can really shuffle the NFC. It seems like we know which 6 teams are going to make the playoffs. I tend to believe that the Rams are out of it. They play on Monday night against Baltimore, which should solidify that take, in my opinion. But the 6 teams could all shuffle throughout here, and this week we might look back in a few months and be like, okay, it was week 12 that really shifted the power, and that's entirely dependent on San Francisco and Green Bay as well as Seattle against Philadelphia, and then you could also throw in Dallas at New England, which is your 325 watch game, because of how that could affect the NFC as well.
If you're right in that, if you're right and Dallas ends up beating New England, that would essentially, I don't know what the schedules look like, but you're talking about that's a clincher in the NFC East right there, and then
especially if Seattle's able to beat Philadelphia,
right? And then that makes the Vikings Seahawks Monday night game just massive because you're going to want to play Dallas versus playing New Orleans, playing San Francisco or Green Bay or whoever it would be as a 3 seed. You're going to want to play the 4 seed NFC East champion Cowboys.
All right, so I think we've gone through. Those are the games. Now, I want to go through each of these individually and rank not rank, but talk about the importance of each of these games. We'll do a scale of 1 to 10, and we'll start with that Green Bay San Francisco game.
10.
That's a pretty clear 10, right? The next one of in level of importance, in my opinion, is that Seattle against Philadelphia game. Where does that one rank on your?
I think 8.5. I mean, I think either way, the Seattle game's gonna be super important for
Because that
for wild
technically
card implications.
that has wild card implications for the Vikings. So if between the 5 and the 6 seed, but it also has NFC East implications, which I think we've made this clear already that Philadelphia and Dallas are the weakest link in the NFC right now.
Yeah.
One of those two teams. So you can go to Philadelphia, which the Vikings obviously do not have a great history there the last couple of years. They did win most recently, but
So the Vikings have beaten Dallas and Philly at their places,
right,
this year and last year. So,
but they do have that playoff bust against Philadelphia, which kind of is a hangover for. I mean, as a Vikings fan, I think more about the playoff loss than I think about the 2 wins against Philadelphia the last couple of years.
Yeah, fair.
I would say I would still say that game's like a 9 because I think I would rather travel to Philadelphia because their wide receivers are trash, and the Vikings' weakest part of their defense, or the weakest part of their entire team, really, is their defensive backs. I mean, who do you trust Xavier Rhodes to cover more, Amari Cooper or Alshon Jeffrey / Nelson Aguilar? I think that answer is pretty clear cut right now. So if Philadelphia can get that win against Seattle, not only do they they shove Seattle to the side and, like you said, make that Monday night game against Seattle next week more important, but they also hurt Dallas's playoff chances as well, and I would much rather face Philadelphia in the postseason at Lincoln Financial than go down to Jerry's World in Dallas.
Okay.
So I'm gonna mark that one as a 9. And the last one here on the docket is Carolina against New Orleans, who, like I said, this game is not necessarily as important to Vikings fans, but I do think this should be in your rotation at noon because I think it'll be a good game. This is the opportunity for Kyle Allen to kind of get something back after that wreck of a performance last week. And if New Orleans loses, they all of a sudden might fall out of that bye week conversation. Well, they'll still be in the bye week conversation, but less so than they were last week. So this one kind of ranks high too because this would also theoretically eliminate Carolina from the conversation and boost the Vikings playoff percentage. If you look at 538 next week and Carolina loses, the Vikings should be at like 96%. If Los Angeles
I think they're already at that.
Well, it'll go up even further. It'll go up to like 98.
I mean, I don't see this one as it's not important, but you got a Carolina team that I just don't see Kyle Allen going very far, and their defense is not great. So this might be like a 6 just because.
That's where I'm at too. That sounds about right.
5, maybe even less, just because Saints are going to win this game. It's at home. I don't see this being that close. So, if I may, if you're, again, we're talking about NFC playoff games and whatnot, but I really like a different matchup. It's of AFC teams, Denver and Buffalo. I think it's going to be a fun game to watch in terms of pure entertainment.
Really?
Now,
those are two of the most.
I do.
Oh man,
I am very confident it's going to be a close game. It's going to be a close game. Now that doesn't mean it'll be the highest quality of football.
Yeah.
But it'll be a close game, and one that I think will go down to the wire. And you'll see some in terms of entertainment wise, it's going to be good because it'll be close. And you'll see some weird plays at the end of the game.
The last one here that I would keep an eye on that I've mentioned a couple of times. Dallas, New England, I think that falls into a even lower category than the Carolina, New Orleans one, somewhere around a 4 or 5. But that's probably your 3 o'clock watch. There is only 2 3 o'clock games on this week for what it's worth. Not great scheduling by the NFL. I don't know why they ever only have 2 3 o'clock games and then a slate of like 10 of them at noon.
They force America to watch the Cowboys every single week.
Yeah,
with Joe Buck and Troy Aikman.
Yeah,
which I like. I like Buck, but I don't like Aikman. So
yeah, I'm right there with you. So that is your TV scheduling for this upcoming weekend, and we'll finish up here with a quick run through of our picks, and then a gambling lock of the week as well. So we've already mentioned a lot of these games. One of them that we haven't mentioned is Houston. They've got Indianapolis coming to town. Houston's coming off of the worst loss of Deshaun Watson's football life. He has never played that poorly. I think that Indianapolis should probably be expecting him to come out in a rage. It's sort of a gut check moment for Deshaun Watson. He hasn't had one of these yet, but I think he's always been sort of groomed to be that type of guy who can stare into adversity and turn out a great performance. Who you got in this one?
I got Deshaun and the Texans. they're not going to play that badly 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think Indianapolis is kind of coming off a bit of a fluky performance. They also probably will not have Marlon Mack this week, so something to keep in mind. Next one here, Tampa Bay at Atlanta, another NFC matchup, one that we did talk about, and for good reason. Two teams that are falling apart. Well, they have already fallen apart or are currently falling apart. You can kind of pick which one you think those are. Bruce Arians heads down to Atlanta. Who you got?
I'm going with Atlanta, but I don't really care who wins this game at all. I'll pick Atlanta just because they recently beat New Orleans at New Orleans. So
I'm also picking Atlanta, and I meant to say up to Atlanta, I suppose. I'm taking Atlanta just because they look like the team that I thought Atlanta was, straight up. And Tampa Bay's secondary is garbage, so I'm expecting a 30-point fantasy performance from Julio Jones this week. He might actually score. It's possible. So He might. The next one is your favorite game of the week, Denver at Buffalo. Some of the most reckless fans in the NFL. By the way, Buffalo tickets right now, if you're interested, Buffalo tickets are still you can get a Buffalo ticket right now for $21 for that playoff team right there. They play against the Denver Broncos.
Playoff
defense,
team.
Yeah, defense versus defense right there. Who you got?
I'm going Denver in this game. Now, you'll hear from me in the lock of the week with this game, but I feel very good about Denver this week because the defenses the Bills have played this year, it's been like the Patriots, and then you get really nothing else. And so they're finally going to play another defense that's worth something this week, and I think it's going to be you're going to notice down the field with that Bills offense. Yeah,
I'm going to take Buffalo. I don't know why I'm taking Buffalo. Ultimately, I trust Josh Allen a little bit more than I trust Mr. Allen out there in Denver. So, it's an Allen on Allen. I didn't even realize that. We got an all-Allen matchup. I'm taking Buffalo. That's what I'm going with. I will not be watching that game. I don't care about that game. I will watch the last 2 minutes on Red Zone. The next one here, New York Giants. They're traveling to Chicago. Chicago looks hilarious. I'm having a great time with their pain. And Danny Dimes
scoring 5 points a week.
Yeah.
And their coach won't change anything. It's so bad.
It is really
bad.
Who
could have seen it coming? Who could have seen this regression coming from Mitch Trubisky?
Maybe all of us?
Certainly not us. Actually, yes, all of us. That's exactly what it is. I'm picking the Giants in this game just because it's mostly a rooting interest one. I just really want to see the Bears lose more. Yeah,
I'm going to take the Bears. I don't know why I would take the Bears because it really seems to make sense for I could see the Giants scoring more points against the Bears defense than Chicago can score against the Giants' awful defense.
Exactly.
But I'm still gonna go Chicago. I guess I'll do that to try to get back.
I'd set the over under for Bears points. For I don't know what the total is. For Bears points,
that's a good one too. You could go under.
That's probably at. I mean, because that's a. I bet that's set pretty high just because of the Giants' defense. But I mean, I don't know how. When's the last time the Bears have scored 20 points? I don't even know.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I kind of want to look that up.
Next one here, an AFC matchup, Pitt against Cincinnati. I think this is probably the Bengals' best shot to get a win this season.
I'm going Pitt, but this could be a game that the Bengals could steal. Isn't it weird that the Steelers are still very much in the playoff race in the AFC?
And yet they're very, very bad. Mason Rudolph is garbage, and that's why I'm going with Cincinnati. I believe that Cincinnati is going to get their one win right now this week.
How about this quarterback matchup? Mason Rudolph, Ryan Finley. Mm-hmm. This is what everybody wanted.
Couple guys that are going to be sitting on their couch in probably 2 years, something like that. Seems about right. Unless Ryan Finley really turns a corner. Mason Rudolph has already fallen off a cliff. So, all right, next one here. Miami against Cleveland. Cleveland is on the back end of their schedule. They're playing a bunch of awful opponents. They're looking to make a run, so they will have an eye on that pass game that we just talked about. Who you got in this one?
I got Cleveland. They're going to get to 5-6. They're going to use that schedule to squeak their way back into the playoff picture, and they're ultimately going to barely miss the playoffs, but then Freddie Kitchen's going to keep his job because of it.
That sounds about right. I'm taking Cleveland, too, although I do think it's worth noting that Devontae Parker, man, I think he's turned a corner. He's looking really legit. I think he had over 150 yards.
I think he's always been talented.
Yeah, but he's legit now. He's a fantasy option. I start him right now. And part of that is because my wide receivers are
a viable Dolphin.
Yeah, it's weird, man. I'm taking Cleveland regardless, though. Carolina at New Orleans. That's the next one up here. Who you got in that one?
New Orleans. There's no way they lose 2 duds at home in the same year, right?
Yeah, I've been saying it for how many weeks now that Kyle Allen is trash, and it's finally coming to. He's finally come back down to earth.
It did last week. It definitely showed last week.
Yeah, it certainly did. I'm going New Orleans as well. Oakland at the New York Jets. Oakland, as you said before we started the show, they've got a chance to be up into 7 wins on the season. Who could have seen that coming?
They're going to be 7-4. They're going to be 7-4, which is interesting. Definitely didn't see that. How about that for when the Vikings beat the Raiders week 3? We didn't think that'd be a quality win looking back at it, but it appears to be one if they get to 7-4 for sure.
Imagine if Antonio Brown hadn't lost his marbles and he was still there. I think this team would.
I feel like they'd be worse. They'd be worse.
You think
they'd be worse with him if he was himself. Like if he
if he hadn't lost his marbles, I'm saying if he was the quiet guy,
about a sane, controlled, normal Antonio Brown, then yeah, they'd be better. But Antonio Brown in his state of mind, they would be bad.
Yeah. All right.
He would have lost everything there.
All right, so we're both going Oakland there. Next one here is the Seattle-Philadelphia matchup that we talked about in depth already. Who you got in this one?
I got Seattle. That Eagles offense. Now, granted, they were playing New England last week, but there's no receivers, man. And now it's up to Wentz to just force it to one of the tight ends, and you can only do that for so many snaps. So I'll take Seattle.
I'm going to take Philadelphia, and part of that is because I'm rooting for parity, as we've already talked about. And the other part of that is because, like you said, they don't have receivers in Philadelphia, but outside of Shaquille Griffin, they don't really have much of a secondary in Seattle. So
this is a good point. But on the other side, the Eagles secondary is not great, and Russell Wilson is having MVP
he's
season.
Very great. This is
that could be this could be a shootout.
Yeah, this could. Maybe look at the over for that one. Next one up here is Detroit at Washington. I feel like that's probably an obvious pick, right?
Oh, I'm going Washington.
What? I guess
going Washington.
Okay. I'm going with Detroit.
Going Washington.
Why are you? You've done this twice in a row now. Why?
I picked Washington way too many times this year because I picked them earlier in the year too. I think they beat the Bears. That didn't work out. But just let me not learn my lesson.
All right, I'm going with Detroit. Next one here, Jacksonville at your Tennessee Titans. Who you got in that one?
My Tennessee Titans. Mm-hmm. I'm picking the Titans. They're gonna make this AFC South interesting because one of the other contenders is for sure gonna lose tomorrow night, right? Either Houston or Indianapolis. And the Titans do play Houston 2 more times this year yet.
And
so
they're playing Jacksonville
if Houston
this week,
ends up,
who could also make the AFC South interesting, by the way. They're still in it, even though they had that
kind of
critical
loss. You're not
loss.
picking Jacksonville, are you?
Yeah, I am. Tennessee's gonna lose this game. I'm taking Jacksonville. Nick Foles is bringing out the big swinger this weekend. He's gonna score some points. He looked really good on that first drive, though. You got to give him that. You got to give him the first drive. So if you can replicate that for 4
we know
quarters.
as Vikings fans after watching the 2017 NFC Championship how much that first drive matters.
Now Nick Foles does too. Next one is Dallas at New England. We already talked about this one a little bit too. Who you got in this one?
I'm going New England. If this was in Dallas, I might take Dallas, but until further notice, I'm picking the Patriots at home.
So I'm taking Dallas, and here's my thinking: Tom Brady. I'm never gonna bet against Tom Brady, but he has certainly fallen off a little bit. That offense does not look good at all.
It's not very good. I'm picking the Patriots on the basis of their defense more than Brady's ability to light up the Cowboys by any means.
This is a true test for Dak Prescott. If he lights it up, he's very much in the MVP conversation, especially with a couple of matchups here. With for example, if Russell Wilson has a bad day in Philly, all of a sudden Dak Prescott could be a riser in that MVP conversation.
Yeah,
Get a win against New England in Foxborough, by the way. Green Bay at San Francisco. We already talked about this one. Who are you going with?
Green Bay.
Green Bay.
I don't trust Jimmy G enough to win this type of game.
I'm going to take San Francisco. I think that's a parity pick for me as well. It's a real toss-up, the game itself, because there's so many factors that can influence this game. If Aaron Rodgers comes out and lights it up, it's over, because that San Francisco needs his defense to play well. But at the same time, if Jimmy Garoppolo comes out and plays average, just average, that's really all he needs to do with that defense that he's playing with. I think that San Francisco can move on here and kind of solidify themselves as a bye week team. So I'm taking San Fran. Drew's got Green Bay. Baltimore at Los Angeles Rams. Lamar Jackson continues moving forward in his MVP campaign with his campaign manager, Mark Ingram. Who you got in this
Yeah.
one?
I'm taking Baltimore, and the Rams just something's up, man. Like they're completely different. They scored less than 20 points 5 times this year. No, is that right? 4 times this year.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, they can't. They scored 12 and they scored 17 the last 2 weeks, and that game against the Steelers was just awful.
Mm-hmm.
Something's up with that offense, and it feels like Baltimore defense is not an easy fix for that. So I'm going to go with the the Ravens.
I'm also going with the Ravens. That Sean McVay fad, by the way, not really working out that well. Zach Taylor hasn't won a game yet. Matt LaFleur is the masterpiece, but he had a great team to work with in Green Bay as it is.
Well,
I don't know.
It seems like these not gimmicks, but like new trends, new things, new coaches, whatever it is. Like it seems like there's always like a honeymoon phase of it all working out, things going well. Matt Nagy last year,
Sean McVay
Doug Peterson had the great year, but then it seems like teams quickly figure that stuff out, and then when they're forced to adjust is kind of when things go wrong, and it seems like I was watching that Rams game against the Bears, and again, it is the Bears defense, but in the Steelers game as well. But it just seemed like such an accomplishment for them to get a first down. Yeah. You're not used to seeing that from the Rams. I don't know. Something's different. I'm taking the Ravens.
Yeah. It's weird, man. And that's a funny thing that you pointed out, that it makes it that much. It makes that much crazier. The longevity that Sean Payton has had calling offense. By the way, just think about that. He has been great since I think 2006.
Andy Reid too.
Yeah, wherever he goes. It's pretty incredible that they're able to adjust when seemingly every other offensive guru, I'm throwing that up with air quotes, is unable to do so. To catch you up on where we're at cumulatively, I stand at 8 games behind Drew. I'm 95-66-1, which is still a really good record, by the way. And Drew is 103-58-1 on the year. I think we're actually calling pretty well here. I went 11-3 last week. First time I beat Drew all year. He went 10-4, so I got 1 game back. So that's where we stand, and we'll finish up the show with our gambling lock of the week. Who you got?
I got Denver +4 because if you look at their schedule, I think we talked about this during the Broncos preview. They don't lose games by a lot of points, and
that's true.
They have a bunch of games where they've lost by 2 points. They obviously lost to the Vikings by 4. So I think worst case scenario, they lose this game by a small margin. But I really think they can go into Buffalo and win, which is why obviously I picked them.
I like your rationale behind that one. That seems like a good pick. I'm going Baltimore -3. 3 points just doesn't seem like enough to give the Rams, given that they're the Rams and the way that they have played. So I think Ravens -3 is a nice pick. Now I say that to you, being that we have missed combined cumulatively our last 6 picks together over the last 3 weeks. So we are on a slow
quote
streak.
unquote locks of the week.
Yeah, our locks of the week are not very lock. They're not very lock.
Not very true lock.
Yeah, I've only gotten 4 right this year. So I'm having a rough year with my gambling picks. It's probably a good thing that I'm not putting too much money on these things. All right, so that wraps up the show. As always, you can find us on Daily Norseman now. We're on the Climbing the Pocket Network. Make sure to check out all the other shows that are available on that network. If you don't like us, you'll probably like someone within that network. There's a lot of nice names out there that do excellent shows. You can always find us on iTunes, of course. Make sure to like and subscribe to the show there. Give us a review if you've got the time. 5 stars is nice. Something else, we're happy. We like the criticism. Feel free to leave a comment in the Daily Norseman section below, or reach out to us on Twitter if you have something that you'd like to say to us. We always have some fun with that. That's at unbelievable_MN. So thank you for listening to the show, and hopefully this playoff picture becomes a little bit more clear heading into this crazy Monday night matchup between the Vikings and Seattle that I believe we'll probably begin talking about next Tuesday. Thanks, guys.